My hands. Hi, everyone. Thank you already for your attention, your energy, and everything that hopefully will come of this and the rest of the conference. On the topic of gratitude, I do want to deviate from our planned script to just thank the team at the back, particularly JP. We had a bit of a blip with this earlier, spotted at lunchtime, and the team did everything that they could to pull out all the stops and get it working. So credit where credit's due. Thank you. With that, now it's about us. If we're able to move forward, my name is Taylor Dixon. I'm joined by the eminent Asker Sakuta. We are both research consultants for Brandwatch. What that means is we're responsible for building team structures, data structures, and research structures to facilitate meaningful change in the clients and organizations that we work with. Now, change is hard, right? It requires kind of grounding in business objectives and strategies. It requires rigid justification that can stand up to immense scrutiny, even from people who don't necessarily want change to sometimes happen or succeed. And it requires an energy, an ability to create desire and need in people when you're coming in as a guest. Now, as researchers, we don't get to run away from that and the fact that it's tough, because ultimately change is what we're in the business of. We want to change behaviors of the companies that we work in, and we want to change the behaviors of the consumers that we're researching, eminently to make more money, to drive more viewership, usership, whatever that might be. So that very much underpinned our session today, to find the qualities of change makers within research that we could share with you. In order to expand on our own authority on that and actually offer a grander opinion than ours, we sought to actually interview a bunch of the senior insights leaders, much like many of yourselves, that we work with, in order to channel some of their voice. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
So we interviewed, again, like he said, various individuals from different industries and verticals, as well as in different functions and positions, including head of consumer intelligence, marketing, agency leads. And what we found was everyone that we spoke to, they all shared 3 to 4 of the same 4 qualities or characteristics. And obviously they use different descriptors and adjectives, and they gave different anecdotes to explain their specific situations, and they had a different emphasis on the priority of these characteristics, which one's most important to them at that time. But we were able to collate these 4 attributes, and in essence, they're 4 key literacies. So what these are is data, tech, emotional, and commercial literacy. And so today we want to talk about these 4 literacies in a 3-step structure. We want to dive into each of these literacies first in order to introduce them and describe them from different perspectives and in the context of different industries. And then we'll map out these literacies to sort of look at what it might look like when this literacy is in place and thriving in your team versus when you might be lacking in this literacy. And then finally, we'll offer some methods of how to develop and build these literacies where maybe you might have found that your team is lacking in those. So I want to dive into the first one, shall we? So I want us to maybe first look at the bottom of the slide. One of the head of insights that we interviewed mentioned one of the biggest challenges organizations face in research is researchers habitually floating across the surface. And so here, what do we mean by habitual, and why is this just not enough? In the current research climate where there's an increasing demand for the integration and consolidation of data, I think mentioned by Joanna maybe earlier this day, we can't afford researchers to be routinely processing data and spitting out high-level reports of simple metrics. We also can't afford research teams to be self-contained and only focused on one data source and in their own bubble. We instead need to be, or the researchers need to be reaching out and reeling in various data sources and looking at all the available data together in order to really see the full consumer journey. And we need to be doing that in a meaningful and effective way, which is the hard part. And in doing so, we need to have a healthy, critical attitude towards the idea of validity. For us, this is the skill of logical thinking and analysis, which applies to everything that I just said. And then as for roles, you might be looking at an analyst or a statistician to look for this literacy. Now the next one.
Amazing. Where the data literacy was far more around the math and the scrutiny and the analysis itself, what we found with the tech literacy was that it was more around the sourcing, the tools. I would split it into both technological and technical literacy. The ability to be technically savvy in the teams that you're looking to infiltrate. For those of us working in agencies, we need to step into all kinds of different verticals, different industries. We don't all necessarily have the luxury of a decade of experience working in financial services or working in CPG. So the aptitude to be able to go in, interrogate a business, and understand what's driving them, what decisions they need to make, what milestones they have, what was the term used? What a corporate communications plan needs. What the steps are to develop that. That is a technical savviness that is incredibly powerful in a research change maker, because if that is a skill that you have, that's a skill you bring to the table. The second part, the technological savviness, I want to reference, would obviously love to be able to just embed it, but I think there was a slide that Joanna may have had, and Renska mentioned it as well, that like huge list of different skills and methodologies and different tools that are available to researchers with the expectation that we can do all of them. I find that incredibly intimidating, and yet researchers are often called upon to be the person to distinguish which of those tools we need, when we need them, when they're ready. When do we need a metaverse market research strategy? What is a metaverse market research strategy? Often it's researchers who are asked that question. So both that technical and technological savviness are skills that are incredibly valuable to both agencies, both in-house researchers, and ultimately from all of the heads of insight that we spoke to.
Now we look at emotional. Again, I want us to look at maybe the quote at the top. The global insights manager that we interviewed mentioned consumer research needs to be contextualized to be meaningful. Researchers need to be able to see the world with different glasses, understand different peoples and their point of view. And this, we've been talking about this the whole day, right? We had Thomas' talk and then Anya's talk. What this individual as well, what they so eloquently put is the importance in a researcher to be able to understand people's motivations and just as importantly, the emotions that drive those motivations. We interpreted this as the skill of empathy as well as interpretive thinking combined together. As roles, you might be seeing them in a qualitative researcher or even a consumer advocate. In other words, we mean someone who can stand in the consumer's shoes. And we can go much more deep into it, but again, we've been talking about it the whole day. But also this skill or this literacy is especially important because the way that we frame the consumer is slowly shifting. We're looking at consumers as more diverse, intersectional, and multifaceted. And we can no longer capture that complexity through one-dimensional facets like geolocation, profession, age. Again, we talked about the metaverse, how someone might represent themselves in a different domain, completely different from how they represent themselves in real life. We have, Finstas. People have multiple individualities, and that's the reason that emotional literacy is increasingly important.
And to add yet another one to the pile, because it does go ever taller, this is certainly the one that I feel most strongly about, and forgive me while I try and control my hands, I'm not quite as cool, calm, and collected as Asker is. Business acumen is such an easy term to use, but difficult term to add to the pile of the things that are expected of us. It's also easy to point to all the quotes, but of course that was the purpose of what we wanted to reflect, people who are more eloquent than we. This idea that research teams may feel separate within an organization, cerebral thinkers who feel disconnected from the commercial imperatives of a business. How much would we, and I relate to many, wish to frolic in insights, wish to frolic in data, in incredibly exciting new technologies of visual processing of different faces during an interview process. These are all incredibly powerful tools, but they require a business proposal. They require investment. They require someone able to actually speak in a commercial way and manipulate is probably a strong word, but persuade a business in a commercial way. And what we usually find, and what we found from our interviews, was that typically researchers may pair with a leader or an account director or someone who is more commercially minded, but introducing more voices doesn't make the proposal any more or less, well, typically any more powerful. Having the ability, the aptitude to actually work in business imperatives yourself will mean that what insights you provide are not just actionable because an action can be taken, but actionable because an action wants to be taken, because the business wants to lean in, because it affects the bottom line. It doesn't just increase usership of a video editing platform by making it easier to manipulate, but it increases overall subscriptions and ultimately revenue generated. And we can't disconnect those two things because, alas, that is the corporate world that we often live in. So we mentioned earlier that we were going to go into this this idea of the where you're lacking and where you might be thriving. We'll go through this quite quickly. I think the premise would have been quite wonderful to be interactive and say, raise your hands, but I think some of these might be quite private. So I think if you would be so kind, use this as a litmus test. Consider these different acumen and think of the teams that you work in or the businesses that you're consulting with, maybe the individuals that you work alongside, and think is this a literacy that we have? Is this an opportunity for us to grow? And if we did bring this into our organization in a more front-facing way, could we drive more change?
So looking at data literacy, let's look at the positive first, right? When you're thriving, what might you see? When you're thriving, you're creatively blending and triangulating between different data sources. This might be survey responses, web traffic, social media, sales data, et cetera. And you're doing it in a meaningful way. What that might mean is that you're combining and cross-checking based on logical reasoning, right? So you know exactly why you're looking at that specific combination of data and what aspect of the consumer journey that data set is elucidating. So you might be checking the awareness of your product through survey, while looking at consideration via social media, and you're looking at consumer action via sales data, and you're combining it all together, knowing exactly what those mean together. So data literacy at peak performance is not just validating the insights that you're getting from one data source with another data source, but you're generating insights that can only be found through data integration and consolidation. As Greg Archibald said, most data sets provide insights into some characteristics, but the larger, more interesting and impactful stories come from understanding how data sets fit together. Whereas, when you're lacking, you'll be seeing one of two symptoms. One might be one-dimensional, limited scope reports, and it might be a regular cadence thing, or it might be a few key metrics that you're seeing. But you're finding yourself asking, is this truly unbiased? Is it consistent with other data sources? And where is the supporting evidence that explains why the data looks this way? The other symptom that you might be seeing is an enormous mountain of data sets or facts that doesn't really paint the picture of the landscape as a whole. So then your question is, what's the takeaway? Which points are salient? It's not really telling me much. And as an insights leader said, saying data shows or researcher says passes the responsibility for change to somewhere else. Insight should stand tall and provoke, after all, if it's true, and aligns to your goals, why shouldn't it? And I think this is an amazing quote. What we need to do, if you're lacking in this area, what you need to be doing is to be more critical about how you're using the data and why you're analyzing it that way. If your researcher can't justify the method of analysis that they're doing against being questioned on its purpose or validity, then you might be lacking in this domain.
Thanks, Aska. Yeah, I imagine this one will be probably fairly evident. If you're thriving in an environment where you have strong data architecture, strong data strategy, then that will be evident in the fact that you're able to bring all these different sources together. I mean, I suppose already today in the few networking breaks that we've had, maybe 4 or 5 people have asked that same question of, we're from a primarily social listening company. How do we marry social listening data with survey data, with search data? Why would I pick this one in where I'm already kind of getting a view of the customer, but that comes from the fact that one of them might be a view on attitude and the other one is a view of action. Knowing what kind of particular aspect different data sources are able to bring in and having that all pinned together in a kind of single voice of the consumer, in a single voice of who it is that you're after, that's when you're absolutely thriving. And being able to do that with the right tool at the right time is absolutely going to be an indication that you're doing very, very well in your tech literacy. And technical literacy. Of course, lacking, not having that problem, being in an environment where you have many, many tools, but they operate in parallel. You might have a team that is responsible for survey data. You might have a team that's responsible for search data. And actually getting them to work together might be actually a bit of a rigmarole or a much more challenging thing than you might feel is valuable to the business, so perhaps you don't. This is naturally a mistake. It might be multiple sides of the same coin, but it's the same people that you're looking at. So bringing those all together is incredibly important. And of course, if you're not investing in any of these tools at all, then you might be missing a trick for that very same reason. And it might be tech literacy that's causing that downfall.
Now for emotional literacy. When you're thriving, it kind of says right up there, you're seeing rich, multidimensional, and ecologically valid understanding of consumer motivation and behavior. By ecologically valid, what we mean is grounded in reality. So, when your team has high emotional literacy, you can say with certainty that consumer persona in your report is about a person that actually exists. It's a real person living in a real location with a real job and real relationships. They have real goals and aspirations. When your team has high emotional literacy, the insights are not only statistically or quantitatively valid, but they're also ecologically and qualitatively valid. What that means is you can see the people behind the data. The report tells a true story, and you understand why people make the choices that they make. Frederick Charles says something very eloquently. So today's consumer is complex and multidimensional, and real and relevant insights are no longer solely about, I mentioned this in the beginning, I'm just realizing, geographic location, job role, or opinions on social changes. It's about understanding that a consumer can have several different individualities. So a team with high emotional literacy can bring this complexity into your insights without sacrificing the clarity on the so what and what we should do with it. Whereas, the first sign of this quality lacking is really an over-reliance on statistical data. And I feel we're all a little bit guilty of this because research today is increasingly time-sensitive, right? It's so easy to reach for simple, easy-to-digest metrics and stats. But an insights leader that we interviewed, as they mentioned, that data are people in disguise. People don't wake up wanting a mortgage. They wake up wanting a home. And I wanted to pause there because this is brilliant. There's a story, right? There's a story behind every purchase, every subscription, every click of a link. And it's without understanding that story and understanding the consumer motivation, we can't predict. We will always be reactionary when we don't understand the motivation and the context. When we want to predict what's going to happen next without understanding the why, the motivation, we'll draw a blank. And we want to understand why things have happened in order to predict what's going to happen next.
Amazing. By the amount of nods that I think I saw when we were talking about commercial literacy in the first place, I think you probably know whether you're thriving or lacking in your ability to get proposals through the door, resourcing, and ultimately budgetary changes, particularly nowadays for any of us working in tech. But I think in reality, like the clearest articulation of when you know you're thriving is simply when the insights that you drive through are not just insights, as I mentioned it before, not insights that are actionable, but insights that are tied to the commercial imperatives of the teams that you're looking to influence. Even if you as a researcher or your team as research teams are kind of there to derive insights and share insights and compelling stories and persuasive stories, any disconnect between that story and ultimately what meaningful change it's going to have on the revenue of the company or the core KPIs of the company, any of these are going to be hit with an obstacle of not being able to generate that energy to drive it through. It ends up being a request rather than an incentive. And I think that's a pretty core part of making sure that your research teams are thinking commercially, not borrowing commercial acumen from the people around them or the leaders that they work with. Clear connections between insights communicated in a way that articulates actionable change. And if you hit for the next one, Oscar, the idea of any of those insights not necessarily being driven or actually even successful and convincing and compelling insights landing flat, and you kind of feel, at least from an agency perspective, when we've experienced this, the idea of, but why? It makes sense and it stands up to scrutiny. Often it's just because the direct link between the idea and the impact on the company bottom line just isn't clear enough. So if we hit the next one, ultimately, I think what's incredibly important about these as well, and you may have intuited this, I'm just doing a quick time check, I think we're a couple minutes left, is that to be able to come up with a meaningful proposal, right? In order to be able to get to lean on this commercial acumen to get the investment in the technologies, in the teams, in the resource, in the incredibly exciting project, in the neuro focused analysis. Forgive me, I've already bundled that word. You actually need the tech literacy to be able to do that. If you're going to look for a 1.5 million investment in your metaverse market research strategy, you better be able to stand up to scrutiny when someone asks you what that means and how it's going to impact the business. So even though you might speak the talk the talk, if you can't actually back that up with the technological and technical literacy that you need to be able to do that, once again, you're going to find yourself coming up short. And equally, when you're trying to work with the commercial imperatives of those you're looking to influence, if you can't speak their language, we found this most commonly in financial services. If you're not able to go in there and actually articulate risk and articulate bottom line and actually and convey how the market's shifting and what any of that means, you're going to share wonderful stories to ears that don't see you as the chameleon that's able to shape yourself to fit their business and their needs. And that pairing stands true for our other friends as well.
Yeah, just the same. Data literacy, when you're strong in data literacy, weak and emotional, you're not seeing the people behind the data, right? Just as we covered in the opposite scenario, just with emotional literacy, you're not searching for truth, for validity. There's no one to kind of make sure that everything is statistically valid, really. And so these go hand in hand as researchers, and we wanted to draw that diagonal. So now, this is the final stage. I hope you're still with us. We wanted to offer some methods of how you might be able to grow in these areas. And we sort of divided it in two levels, what you can do at an individual level and what you might be able to do on the business level. For data literacy, the first thing, I mean intuitively, that we know is readings can be done independently. Specifically, to actually learn and know and organize the different types of data that's out there, whether that's surveys, reviews, whatever is relevant to your goal and to your business, to know that range is firstly very important. As well as statistics courses. I'm like, I suck at statistics. I always need to refresh myself on what is validity and you know, which validity processes go with which methods. Refreshers are always good. And at the business level, I think it's going to be useful as to embed peer feedback systems on data and research integrity. Because more eyes is always more better. More eyes is always better. To be able to give each other feedback, to look at each other's outputs critically.
We have 1 minute, Asker. Amazing. So, I mean, tech literacy. On an individual level, I mean, a lot of this comes down to study, right? But not study in a kind of lock yourself away academia sense, but study in a sense of leaning into the state of play, the state of technology, the development of technology, what the metaverse means for different people. Not to use that phrase again, but as the world seeks to expand itself around us and vendors and SaaS companies and agencies want to come in and tell you how they're going to change the world, being able to actually answer that, I think, is important, and that comes from having an understanding of the data available to you, the tools available to you, the ethics of that, and whether your company is set and ready for it. And that can be something done by the individual or something supported by the company, which I think is an important point to take away as well.
For emotional literacy, I think it was Anya who mentioned ethnographic research. Sorry if I'm wrong. Ethnographic research itself, but also just reading up on ethnography. It is a really good way to understand how that methodology works, really. At the business level, internal and external networking opportunities like this conference that we're at right now to be embedded in the onboarding and the development of your team. It's very effective.
And commercial literacy. Taking the time to go and read on the industries that you are trying to get involved in. Understand their earnings reports. Understand the imperatives of their business. What case studies have they put out? Why have they done a specific campaign? Like, what was it that they were aiming for? Any of that information is nectar for someone looking to improve the acumen that they have and their ability to influence using the lingo and the language and the incentives of those that they're working with. Thank you. I know we have to be closed.